How do I not let the negative comments affect me in the workplace? How can I stop taking everything personally?
There's a deeper question within this question, but this is all of humanity, right? One of my favorite books, I still recommend it probably more than any other book to this day, is The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I think it's the second agreement is don't take anything personal. To the degree in which we know and love ourselves and we have a clear understanding of our own identity, to that degree, I would suggest it is easier to not take things personal. Meaning, if somebody came up and said something to you that you know is clearly not true, not ambiguously not true, or opinionatedly not true, but clearly not true, you probably wouldn't take it personal because you know who you are. So just being super silly, if somebody came up and accused you of being an alien and not from this planet, and you were very certain that you were human and not alien, you probably would go, what is wrong with this person? You're not likely going to take what they're saying personal because your identity is clearly defined and you know who you are. When we're not as certain of our identity or we're insecure with our identity, we tend to take things more personal. And so to me, the inner work is understanding who you truly are and loving and accepting who you really are. When you get that way, it's much harder to be offended by other people. And here's the truth. 99% of what people are saying has nothing to do with you. Most people aren't thinking about anyone other than themselves. There's an old saying in the woo-woo community that two egos will never meet. And I fully agree with this because all an ego can see is itself, and it's only trying to solve for itself. And so when you learn to see people trying to solve their own problems and take what they're saying through their lens, not through what it means to you, it's easier to surrender what is being said and not allow it to impact you. Now, I will say, as I use a rule of 3, if I hear multiple people giving the same feedback about me that are not connected to one another, I'm more likely to evaluate it and see how I'm showing up and how I may be causing this perception, or maybe where I'm unaware of something that I'm doing that is creating this story so that I can learn from it. So I wouldn't wholesalely reject negative feedback or feedback that I don't like or negative comments. You can learn from it. And some of the best learnings come from people who aren't afraid to say what they see. It doesn't mean they're always right, but if I start hearing a lot of different people saying the same thing, it probably means there's at least a grain of truth to it, and I want to see how I can adjust. But solidify your own identity. When your own identity is intact, you're less likely to take what somebody is saying as personal. Also recognize that most people aren't thinking about you when they say things or do things. They're thinking about themselves. And so why would you take that personal? I think I've heard it said so many times, but within a few generations, no matter what your impact was on the world, within a few generations, you probably won't be remembered, or most people won't remember your name. Life is too short to care too much what other people think.
How many hours per day do you put in work? Do you force yourself to disconnect on certain days?
I guess it matters what you define as work. But for me, I enjoy moving the needle in areas. I love co-creating in the world. I love the idea of being productive. But productive can look different ways. I also recognize that both my mind, or my brain, and my body need space to recover, to rejuvenate, to reflect, and to process. And so I generally, at this point in my life, I'm pretty well aware of what my body needs and when I need it, and I have no problem creating recovery protocols to help my body and mind recover so that I can always be at my best. So I don't really track hours, I track how I feel and what I'm experiencing. I will say, if you are not used to working consistently and for long periods of time, it's a muscle like any other that you probably just need to lean into and do more of. We can do far more than we realize. Our minds slow us down way before our bodies do. And so we just have to recalibrate for that. And so just like in the gym world, for anybody who works out, the rep that's most important to do is the one you don't want to do, or the one that you feel like you can't do. It's the same thing in any area of your life. The growth happens in that moment when you don't want to do it, or the growth is in that moment where there is friction or you're having to push. That's experiencing growth, right? That's where the growth happens, is in that push. So if you're somebody who is just getting into the working hard game and it's not something you're very comfortable with, I would suggest push yourself. If you're somebody who's constantly working 60-hour weeks and you feel like you're constantly exhausted, I may look at, hey, what could I do to become more efficient with my time and energy? And what do I do to create more recovery protocols in my weekly habits? And so for me, Sunday works. I'm a huge football fan, so it definitely works during football season. Sunday is kind of my down day. I spend most of that time relaxing, spending time with my family. I'll watch football, or at least watch my Seattle Seahawks play, and then I'll spend the evening kind of reflecting and planning for the week ahead.
I overreact to failure at work. How can I manage my mistake responses internally?
Failure isn't final, but quitting is. If you were a coaching client and you're saying, hey, I have a hard time responding well to failure, this isn't uncommon, I'd want us to take a step back and try to understand your story around failure. What about it makes you respond the way you are? So if we're responding to anything in our life in a way that doesn't serve us, more often than not, it's because at some point in our life, we thought it did serve us. And so we just haven't gone back and evaluated the unconscious behavior to figure out, well, what was my story about this that would make me show up this way? Why would I show up in a way that is ineffective? So I love asking people the question, and myself the question, and any kind of behavior is, how is this serving you? Why are you showing up this way? So if you're overreacting to failure, if you aren't processing it well, if you're taking it too personally and it shuts you down, and you're like, hey, I don't want to live that way anymore. That isn't serving me. It's making it harder for me to respond well at work. It's making it harder for me to do my job well. Then we may want to look at, well, why are you showing up that way? What is your story? And a lot of times with that one, there's a few reasons why people do it. One, they feel like they need to punish themselves. And so it's their way of punishing themselves. Another way that shows up is that we're trying to skirt the actual responsibility of what happened and direct it somewhere else. And so a lot of these things happen at a very young age in our life where we learned to show up this way to get what we want or to get out of trouble. And so as we get older, we realize, well, this isn't helping me anymore. It isn't serving me anymore. And there's usually stories related to it. Sometimes going back and finding out why I show up this way can be helpful. Not always, but sometimes going back and remembering the first time you felt that way. So as a client, I would ask you, do you remember the first time you didn't handle failure well? And at first you may go, no. And then I'd sit with you and maybe ask a few more probing questions and just get you to feel comfortable. And then you might say something like, well, when I was 7 years old, I tried making a cake and I forgot to add the leavening. And so it was flat and it wasn't very good. And my family laughed at me, or my mom laughed at me. And in that moment, I realized, I thought I wanted to be a baker, but in that moment, I realized that I couldn't be. And so you have this story, I just made this up on the fly, but you have this story that then you internalize. And when you got angry about not being able to make the cake, for instance, well, and you shared that you were unhappy, maybe your mom apologized and said, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I just thought it was funny. And you realized in that moment as a 7-year-old, wow, if I make a really big deal out of this or I beat myself over it, I get attention that I actually want. And so when you were a child, it worked. And then you get into the workforce, you get into the real world, and nobody's giving you the attention, nobody's validating you, and it isn't working. And you're like, why do I continue to do this? Probably because at some point in your life, it did serve you. At some point in your life, it was an effective way to get whatever emotional need you were trying to get met. So I would start there and work backwards to figure out, hey, where did this come from? Now, I don't think you always need to go back and figure out, why am I doing this? Sometimes you can just let it go by recognizing it isn't serving you and recalibrating to something that is serving you. And so failure isn't final, quitting is. Most of our greatest lessons come from failure. We learn how not to do things. If you can learn how to not take it personal and be grateful for the lesson and make the adjustment, then you can turn what looks like to be a negative into a positive. But I don't know anybody who's successful that has not failed over and over and over again. It's generally not failure that holds them back. It's their inability to respond well to it. So I appreciate this question. Hopefully that helps.
How do I find my life purpose? I'm very talented, creative, and passionate, but I can't figure out what I'm meant to be doing.
We are happiest, I have found, when we are in service to others and we are growing. And so for me, when this question comes up, what is my life's purpose? I don't know how old you are, and so it could be different depending on your age to a certain degree, but not necessarily. I would say this: what you are genuinely excited about or curious about, or what makes you angry, or what makes you emotional, probably is a hint at your gifts and callings and your general purpose. The good news is, though, you don't actually have to figure out your purpose. And God's not going to show up with an index card and go, hey, just wanted to hand you your purpose here. Go ahead and read that and get to work. Part of the human experience is getting to co-create and discover meaning in life. And so I think the easiest, in my opinion, the best way to do that is to put yourself in an environment where you are asked to grow. Because what happens is, as you grow and as you push yourself, your natural gifts will become more obvious, your passions will get clearer, and you'll kind of figure out where your zone of genius is. But you don't figure it out by sitting on the couch and contemplating and meditating about the purpose and meaning of life. You generally are going to figure that out in action by going out and doing something. So get in community, have fun, push yourself, pick up a hobby where you can grow, go get a job or a business that's going to challenge you and push you, and see what begins to come out. And I promise you, you'll begin to identify the things that really get you going. And also, again, pay attention to the things that either push you or put you in an emotional state, right? You'll learn a lot about likely your values and kind of your worldview by seeing what gets you either angry or gets you passionate to come to the aid of, or gets you excited to figure out how to solve for. So we're not all called here to answer every question or to answer every problem in the world, but I do believe we're all here to answer a particular problem or challenge in the world, and we just have to put ourselves in an environment where we grow and learn, and that will likely come out.
How do you consistently instill discipline in your life?
Discipline is greater than motivation. This is a great one. Hold yourself accountable, and if you can't hold yourself accountable, outsource accountability to someone else until you can. Meaning, be clear about what you're about, state it publicly, meaning to the people in your life, tell people what you're trying to accomplish, and if you don't have the internal mechanisms of discipline, then you can literally hire or outsource that discipline to someone else. i.e., if you don't do well going to the gym by yourself, pay to have a trainer wait for you every day at the gym. The fact that you paid for that training is likely going to increase the chances that you show up for it. Having somebody call you or text you and go, hey, looking forward to see you tonight after work. Make sure to bring bop, 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 bop. I'll see you then. Will go a long ways towards helping instill the habits necessary to build the discipline to succeed. And so, first of all, figure out whether you're a person that has enough internal fortitude to make the right decisions, or if you need to outsource it, and be honest with yourself. There's lots of people that do better outsourcing their discipline to someone else. I think long term, you're probably going to want to internalize that, but sometimes we can kickstart it by first having it outside of ourselves. And a lot of people pick up discipline when the pain of staying the same gets so painful that we're now willing to do the work and to actually change. And so that's a frustrating part of the human experience, that a lot of us don't change until the pain is too great, and then finally we say enough is enough, and inherently we find the discipline necessary to change that part of our life. But figure out who you are, figure out whether that's something that you can do on your own or you need to outsource, and then create little reminders in your environment that remind you about who you are, who you're becoming, and what you want, that kind of trigger you into those states. So if I need to be going to the gym, or I've committed going to the gym, I would pack my bag for the gym the night before, and I'd put it in my car or at my front door so that I can see it. And if I put it in my car, I may very well put it in the front seat, in the passenger front seat, not in the trunk, so that when I get in the car, I see it and it helps me remember, oh yes, that's what I'm doing. Or put it at my front door so there's no way for me to miss it on the way out, and I remember, right, I'm going to the gym tonight. So you can create little mental reminders that help remind you of what it is you're trying to accomplish. But discipline is more powerful than motivation. A lot of the questions I get related, how do I motivate myself? There are lots of things that you're going to need to do in life that you may not be initially motivated to do. This is where discipline comes in. So this is an important question, learning how to do it. And it really is the mental fortitude to make the right decision and do what we've committed to, even when we don't feel like it. In the world we're living in, that's all about its feels, this is going to become increasingly more important, that we know how to follow through on the things that we say we're going to do. And that, to me, is a value decision, and it's about having the mental fortitude to do it, which is exercising like any other muscle. Hopefully that helps.